This is Common Sense Radio. Straightforward and no excuses.
All right. Come on now.
This is the Steve Gruber Show.
Call me crazy.
Oh, yeah.
What I said was perfectly right and spot on accurate.
Boy's got a mouth like a cannon, always shooting it all.
Stop.
Got it.
Stop. I mean, you're way off script.
Got it in me. Gonna quit until it all comes out.
Hey, boy!
Been a long education.
Yeah, it's not cynical. It's common sense.
Pay attention to me when I'm talking to you.
I'm gonna rock the nation. Rock the nation.
Genuine, accountable, and raw. Here is Steve Gruber.
6 after the hour, and quickly on a sports note before we move on to other news for the day. Maybe now, at some point here, we can stop hearing about how the SEC and all these other conferences are the best football conferences and the best this, the best, and always downplaying the Big Ten. That's what I have to say about that. Enough already. Sorry about your radio. Ohio State's number 1, Michigan State number 2 in the Associated Press top 25, giving the Big Ten top 2 teams in the rankings for the first time since 2006 when it was Michigan and Ohio State. The Buckeyes received 40 first-place votes after a lackluster performance against Northern Illinois Saturday. Michigan State got 7 first-place votes. Yeah, Ohio State and Michigan went into their annual rivalry game number 1 and number 2, respectively, back in 2006. Number 3, Mississippi made a big jump from number 15 after winning at Alabama. The tie dropped from number 2 to number 12. There you have it, though, Michigan State and Ohio State. I mean, pretty solid to say the least. And good for the Big Ten and good for Michigan State. And if you're an Ohio State fan, well, so you are. It's Monday here on the Steve Gruber Show, 8 minutes past the hour. Joe Biden now apparently has the support of his wife. And contrary to earlier reports suggesting that his wife remained an obstacle to his potential run for president, sources telling NBC News that Jill Biden fully behind him for another bid. Jill Biden, sources tell NBC's Chuck Todd, is 100% on board with a presidential run, despite reports indicating her hesitation is part of what's keeping Biden from jumping into the race. And that looks more likely by the day, as sources have indicated Biden's been meeting with Democratic leaders during his travels around the nation over the past week to tell them he wants to do it and thinks there's room for him to make a credible bid if he does. Now, the key question that's still weighing on his mind as he decides whether to make another go of it, does he have the emotional energy to give it his all? You had a question? But Biden knows that if he has any hopes of winning the nomination, he's better off deciding whether to run by October 1st than waiting until the drop-dead deadline of November the 5th, the day before the first Democratic primary filing deadline in Alabama. Now, the debates are coming up here in October.
With the Democrats?
For the first Democratic debate, October 13th in Las Vegas. So he really needs to get in before the 13th of October, which I believe he will. I mean, that's the smart thing to do. And if he comes in and jumps into the debate, he could and have any sort of, because it'll rattle Hillary. If he jumps in like the 10th of October or something, it'll rattle Hillary. He'll come out, he'll have a good performance in the debate. He could propel himself right into the number 1 position right off the get-go. And she will be in deep trouble right there.
I just have a really hard time believing how people can still support Hillary Clinton and not without knowing all the facts. I mean, we have company and they are hardcore Hillary supporters. And I've asked them, what has she accomplished? Well, she traveled all over the world. And so what? So did I. So does Kim Kardashian. They have no knowledge of what exactly.
Kim Kardashian travels all by that measurement. Kim Kardashian travels all over the world. She should be qualified to be president.
They have no real understanding of the issues at hand. What they know is Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton is a Democrat and a woman.
That's
and
all
what's
they know.
more important to them is that it's the first woman president.
That's right. That's
and
all they care about.
And she's a Democrat.
and that she'd be
That's
the
it.
first woman president. That's it. That's her qualification. She's a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Has to do with her plumbing, not her politics.
And this, and the scary thing is when you watch, what's his name on Fox News that goes out and Jesse Waters.
Yeah, Jesse Waters.
You go out and ask these same questions about, okay, what is Hillary Clinton's accomplishments, and people
They don't have an idea.
They don't have any answer, and the biggest thing to them is she's a woman.
That's it. And now
this is scary.
we have that sound, right, of her pretending to be an outsider.
I don't know if Alex has that sound ready.
All right, well, we'll get that in a little bit. But Hillary over the weekend was trying to portray herself as some sort of an outsider.
Yeah.
Well, what a joke.
Yeah, it's just...
What a joke. Anyhow, Bernie Sanders also a thorn in her side. This is where, make no mistake, Joe Biden getting into the race is a product of Bernie Sanders. Because Bernie Sanders has garnered the support, getting 10 and 15 and 20,000 people at rallies has had Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders is leading in New Hampshire. He's not leading nationally, but he's leading in New Hampshire. He's also leading in some polls in Iowa, which means Hillary Clinton is very vulnerable. Let's be honest, people don't like her. They don't like her. You say what you want, but she's a cold fish. If she is a warm and cuddly candidate, she'd be cruising in first place. Of course, if she is a warm and cuddly candidate, she'd probably be president of the United States already. But she's not. She's cold. She's calculated. Nobody's particularly trust her. Even the Democrats don't particularly trust her, except the ones that are, blindly behind her, blind faith.
Or, one of her people that she's paying,
Well, exactly. Here's a little cash on the side. Be my supporter. But at any rate, that Joe Biden, that's why he's going to get into the race here. Made no mistake. For the Republicans, the end of the line is probably not far away. And I'm surprised to say that Scott Walker is going to be one of the first people that runs out of cash and opportunity, because nobody's going to give him money now. Unless he can restart his campaign and soon, it's over for Walker. Rand Paul won the straw poll on Mackinac Island over the weekend here in Michigan. It means exactly nothing. Rand Paul had some supporters there. He's polling at 1%. He'll be out of the race soon. Mike Huckabee, he has nothing. He's not going anywhere. Chris Christie, I don't believe he's going anywhere. You start to look at it. This poll is going to have to. The polls are going to whittle down the people that are involved in this race, and they have to. There's only so much money to go around. Jeb Bush still not in good shape. His polling numbers are single digit all over. So the question then becomes, who's really going to be a viable candidate? We've got a few weeks to go before you find out. Carly looks like she could stay in this thing. I think Trump stays in for a while. Kasich does have the money. Bush does have the money. And Marco Rubio has gotten a big boost in the polls since the last debate, as he should have, because he's one of the guys we talked about, Ivy, that we thought gave a really strong performance.
He is very interesting in my mind, that's for sure. I'll have to watch out for what else he has to say.
It's Monday, 14 after the hour here on the Steve Gruber Show. We'll be right back.
Keeping you in touch with Michigan and the world.
$18 after the hour. President Obama's war on the poor apparently is going to continue unabated as he works on his legacy. His legacy much more important than whether or not old people have heat in their homes or lights, I suppose, or if poor people have enough electricity. It just doesn't matter. It's the war on the poor. Because that's what the EPA, in Michigan alone, 9 coal-fired power plants shutting down by April, 1.5 gigawatts of electricity being taken out of the grid. It'll have no effect whatsoever. Oh, wait, unless you actually ask the people that know, at which point, they'll be rolling blackouts and other problems. Not to mention the cost of electricity is going to go through the roof. But don't worry, I'm sure the government was willing to subsidize that, taking more money from working people like you and I, because they screwed the system up again. Chris Horner here, senior legal fellow at E&E Legal and senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And where am I going wrong on this? It seems to me that it's a war on the poor.
Well, it's not an accident what's happening to them, and we now know for sure what's going to happen further. That is, it's going to kill them if to the extent these necessarily skyrocketing electricity rates are not already. The reason I say it was not only a predictable but predicted outcome is the president said he wanted to necessarily skyrocket electricity rates. That's seniors, the poor, the most vulnerable who now, after admissions that climate change policies would not detectably impact climate, now the most vulnerable is the reason we're imposing the climate agenda. Turns out it's killing them, as you should have expected, because he said he would cause rates to necessarily skyrocket. That was the point. It wasn't just to, quote, bankrupt politically deselected industries and to, quote, finally make renewable energy profitable after 125 years of commercial failure, but a lot of the right donors now. It was to cause rates to skyrocket. So if you remember, the president gave all these speeches over and over again. Look to Spain if you want to see how it's going to work out. People did. He stopped giving that speech. He started saying Germany, Denmark, whatever. They're all pushing the same agenda. Well, new numbers came out last week.
Well, not everybody.
The UK, 15,000 seniors died from these policies. Additionally, 15,000 seniors froze in their apartments because they couldn't afford to heat and eat.
And that's in the UK.
Yep.
So here's the thing. His policies on driving the price of gasoline to $8 a gallon, that didn't happen. In fact, gas is cheap, so he has to look in another direction. So energy poverty. So here's the thing. It's interesting that all these young global warmists, pounding their fists on the table, well, they're young. They don't have to sit on a fixed income in an apartment somewhere in Pennsylvania where it's 15 degrees below zero. Do they not get it, or they just not care? But I think they're ignorant to the fact of what they're doing.
Generally, but you've nailed a theme that needs to be teased out a bit, because it is quite clear among this very Western, wealthy white movement, and yes, there are aggressive efforts underway to put a different face on the environmentalist movement, but it is nonetheless a Upper West Side, Western, wealthy Rockefeller Brothers movement. People, when they say people can't, people should be stopped from, people must, they're always saying other people. These are the folks who will never feel the pain, or those who the youth can't imagine ever being the victims of this. So, yes, generally they're speaking about other people. There are, however, an awful lot of these folks who, as I point out, I have a first book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming and Environmentalism. I detailed an awful lot of not rogue actors, but main principles in the movement and the things they say. One gentleman got promoted from chief scientist of environmental defense to the board after he said that's as good a way to get rid of them as any. What was he talking about? When challenged that a ban on DDT would kill many, many, many Sri Lankan babies, he said that's as good a way to get rid of them as any.
Well, that's what I've said for a long time. See, it's interesting you bring up DDT, because people in America, it's great that we got rid of DDT. Yeah, unless you live in a country that has malaria. At which point, at what cost is the question we get rid of this, and at what cost? And most people in this country and their do-good mentality think, well, we're doing good, and because it says so, and right here, and I can save the planet and this little bird, and they don't realize the Sri Lankan babies and all the other, at what cost, I say again.
Well, and here's the thing. That is now a car alarm in the background. We can talk about millions, hundreds of billions, trillions, and it just gets nowhere. Well, the truth is we have a different metric. Why don't we, now that it's a consensus, yes, forgive me, but there's a consensus. The temperature after cap and trade, a carbon tax, your governor adopting this agenda, the Kyoto Treaty, the Paris Treaty has succeeded. The temperature after all of those, perfectly implemented for 100 years, pause, wait for laughter, is agreed to be whatever it would have been without them. There is no detectable impact on temperature projected from any of these. Okay, so it's about something, but it's not about climate. So here's the question. What's the right number of seniors and the poor to kill for no impact on climate? If you give us that number, we can have the discussion. We'll have the conversation. What's the right number of seniors to have freeze in their flats, having failed to burn enough books to stay warm? Watch the video of these headlines that are coming to you soon, are now in the UK, at eelegal.org, and say, okay, here's the right number of grannies to kill. We can have an actor looking like whatever their candidate looks like, instead of Paul Ryan rolling Granny off the cliff.
And by the way, if you don't believe it, and we're on the line here with Christopher Horner, Senior Legal Fellow at the E&E, and the Legal and Senior Fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. If you don't believe it, there's plenty of research available about the 15,000 people that died in the UK. That research was published in May of this year, 2015, so it's out there. And so if you're a skeptic of these facts, go look it up for yourself is what I suggest strongly, Christopher, because people are going to say, oh, that's just not true. Really? Do a little research. It's a crazy thing we used to call when I was a kid reading. Yeah. So nobody does it anymore, but it's a thing we used to gain knowledge by a thing called reading. Anyhow, I'll give you 30 seconds for the last word.
Okay, well, it's a difficult challenge to your confirmation bias, folks. Go to The Guardian or The Independent, nice, comfy, red left-wing magazines and newspapers, and see they talk about the scandal of England's fuel poverty deaths, 32,000 in 2012-2013. It skyrocketed to 49,000 the next year. 15,000 of those died because they couldn't keep their apartment warm. Hypothermia, they died freezing in their apartment because you've priced energy out of their reach. Social justice does not mean killing seniors and the poor.
Yeah, there you have it. Christopher, greatly appreciate your time today. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you.
Christopher Horner. There you have it. Windmills. Not just killing birds of prey, but killing your neighbors. Think about it. We'll be back on the Steve Gruber Show.
Michigan, born and raised with Midwestern values and Michigan common sense.
All right, 33 after the hour. Friday, we were live from Mackinac Island, and I ran into some folks at Friday Night Football, and they said, "No, wait a second. Were you live on the radio this morning, or were you on tape?" "No, I'm live." "What, do you got a helicopter?" "No, but I wish I did, because if we had a Jet Ranger 404, we'd get a lot more work done. Ivy and I on a Jet Ranger 404 with 6 leather bucket seats, cruising speed of, 200 miles an hour? We can get some stuff done in that bird now." Anyhow, welcome back to the program. It's the Steve Gruber Show on a Monday. But because of some prior engagements, we couldn't stick around. But the newest member of the team, Katie Heid, a veteran news reporter and journalist, who's also a professor teaching in Baker College in Owasso, had the opportunity to go up there and visit with some of these folks. And she joins us now to talk a little bit about it. Katie, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Steve.
And welcome to the team.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's good to be back.
Yeah, glad to have you on board. I know you've been out of news for a bit, but you've been a news reporter in the past. You've a speech coach and a professor in a lot of things. How did it feel up there to get in, just jump right into the deep end of the pool with all those politicians?
Well, you said it best. It was literally jumping into the deep end of the pool. But I think 2 things stood out when I was up there is that, one, Michigan Republicans desperately want a Republican in the White House in 2016, and they also need a candidate that's going to unify the party. Those were the 2 things that stood out to me when I was up there this weekend.
Now, we had the chance to, I've had the chance to talk to John Kasich and Rand Paul along the way. I've talked to Carly Fiorina a couple of times. You had a chance to visit with Rand Paul and Ted Cruz. You heard Kasich speak. Bush got his way out. But you were telling me here when we were talking about it here yesterday that when Carly came into the room, it was a different atmosphere.
It really was. She came into the room. Candace Miller was introducing her, and people started to stand when she entered. She wasn't quite ready to make it on the stage, but they were ready to get up. And when she was finally introduced, they stood to their feet. They gave her a standing ovation. And I think one of your guests said it earlier in the hour. It was like she was a rock star. She energized that room like no other candidate had the whole weekend. Not to say that people weren't excited to see Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, but she lit up that room.
So what do you think? The other candidates were, politely received and so on and so forth, and the term rock star has been thrown around a little bit. Now, in fairness, on the last debate last Wednesday, she was not the front runner, but now if you look at the polling, she has moved into second and third place in polling across the country. Marco Rubio has also increased his standing, and Donald Trump's numbers have decreased a little bit. So I guess my question to you is a veteran out there and covering these sorts of things. She's going to be the one with the target on her back now. She's going to have a big bullseye on her now, and I wonder how she's going to take the pressure.
I wonder that, too, because, in this business, it's a quick rise to fame, and you can get shot down overnight. And she is moving with a lot of momentum from last week's debates. But I want to throw this out to your listeners and see what they go with it. When I was listening to her, it reminded me a lot of 2008 when John McCain was running. And there was no way he was going to win the White House. He just wasn't. And he went and announced that Sarah Palin was going to be his running mate. And it was like the Republican Party was electrified. She brought an energy to the party that they desperately needed. Now, I still don't think at that time that McCain had a chance of winning, but she brought in voters that he would not have been able to bring in on their own. And so I kind of saw the same thing with Carly Fiorina, that she can bring in voters that maybe another Republican candidate can't. She's been in business before. Some may say that can work against her, but she's been in big business. She's a woman. She's articulate, and she's not a career politician. And I think that appeals to so many people.
That clearly is the thing that's getting a lot of people's attention this time around for sure. Donald Trump, Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, the outsiders, currently picking up about 60% of the vote nationally between the three of them. So obviously there is a move for, at least at this point in the conversation, we'll see where we are come January and February. But right now there's clearly a movement in the conversation to look to outsiders. Now, one of the folks you had a chance to sit down with was Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. And if you don't mind, Katie, we'll just take a bite here from one of his excerpts of your sit-down conversation with Rand Paul. Alex, go ahead and roll that.
We just wondered, Michigan is typically a Democrat state. What would you have to offer anybody who is undecided or typically votes for the Democrat Party?
Well, I think one of my strengths as being the Republican nominee is that I can draw independent vote and I can draw a Democrat vote, and I'm not afraid to actually go and ask people for their vote in Detroit. Republicans haven't done very well in Detroit. I think last time we got 3% of the vote. I think we can get vote because, frankly, the Democrats haven't helped people in Detroit. The Democrats haven't helped with poverty. The Democrats haven't helped with joblessness. So I think we ought to try something different. Instead of sending our money to Washington and begging to have some come back for a poverty program, why don't we never send it to Washington? So I have a tax plan that would reduce Detroit as a city $1.3 billion tax reduction over 10 years, and that's $1.3 billion that would help create jobs in Detroit. I think that makes me different than many of the other Republicans, is that not only do I have a plan, I want to bring it to Detroit because I want to get votes in Detroit.
So there, and what I find interesting about Rand Paul's appearance on the island now nationally, Katie, is, and we're both Katie Heid, the newest member of the Steve Gruber Show team here, a veteran reporter and professor at Baker College in Owasso, who has joined our team to bring insight and this sort of thing to us. Rand Paul came out on the top of the straw poll, which I find interesting because nationally, he's polling about 1%. So I guess I'll ask you, is that just a product of the weekend and the way that things are set up? Or is there something we could take that's more out of that, that maybe Rand Paul's a little stronger than we would have thought?
Well, I think it's definitely, you mentioned the straw poll, it could be that. I desperately think he's trying to appeal to these undecided voters here in the state. And like I said with my question, we tended as a state to go for the Democratic candidate. And he mentioned Detroit, he mentioned his tax plan, he mentioned bringing jobs back, keeping the money here in the state. And I think that has some appeal, but I also got the sense, now this is just me and my observation, that his campaign is running out of steam a little bit. And I think that is his effort to appeal to voters here, those that might be undecided or typically vote the other ticket. But I don't know. That may appeal to some people, but I think I also got the impression in the room that people have heard this before. They've heard promises. They've heard that you're going to try to help the poverty situation. They've heard politicians promise jobs. They've heard them promise this and that. And then they get to Washington and they don't do that. And
they don't deliver on anything once they get there, yeah.
No. And that was a key thing that was heard throughout the weekend, too, is we've heard all this before. It's great to say what you're going to do on the first day of office. I mean, Ted Cruz laid out a 9-point plan of what he's going to do right after he gets inaugurated. But we've heard that before. So what are you going to do to get it done? And I don't know if Rand Paul has it in him to get it done.
Yeah, I wonder as well. In fact, I think that Rand Paul, Scott Walker now polling less than 1%, Mike Huckabee, Chris Christie, a whole host of candidates in trouble because they're not going to be able to raise the money. Now, Katie, we're going to have you back here in the third hour as well and hear part of your conversation with Ted Cruz and hear some of the Carly Fiorina remarks that you're able to catch as well. So I think the way it came out, Rand Paul was number one, Carly Fiorina was number two, and John Kasich number three in the straw poll on Mackinac Island. Katie Heid, great job, and I greatly appreciate you joining the team. Welcome aboard, and we'll talk in a moment.
Thank you. Sounds great.
There you have it, 41 after the hour. Katie Heid, the newest member of our team here. Glad to have her on board. She'll be back in hour 3 with some Ted Cruz remarks, some Carly Fiorina remarks, all from Mackinac Island and all right here in Michigan.
Covering Michigan and the world from his bunker below the bridge. Here is Steve Gruber.
All righty, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to shift gears a little bit here on the program and tell a personal story of triumph and survival, if you will. Our next guest is Dr. Vin Chung, author of Where the Wind Leads, a refugee family's miraculous story of loss, rescue, and redemption. Born in South Vietnam just 8 months after it fell to the communists in 1975, his family was wealthy, controlled a huge rice milling operation worth millions, but after the communist takeover, they were reduced to abject poverty. And by 1979, they realized there was no future for their children. They had to flee. They became boat people, even though they knew 250,000 of their countrymen would die in the South China Sea. They made a run for it. And the story from there is miraculous. Doctor, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, it's an incredible background to this story. And I've had the opportunity to meet some folks that fled Vietnam about the same time period as you did, that I've gotten to know a little bit here in Michigan. But your story is one of overcoming the odds, to say the least. I think that's pretty fair to say.
It sure is. You know, it's also a story of the amazing opportunities that we have in this country and just the incredible kindness and generosity that everyday Americans have.
When you say that, you know, you went from a prosperous family business worth millions to abject poverty to, you know, riding out into the unknown, into the abyss of the South China Sea and surviving, and then coming to America. So for somebody coming to America, having not been here before, what would you tell somebody if somebody fell off a spaceship today and you were going to tell them about America? What would you tell them?
I'll tell them that the American dream is still possible, but it just requires a lot of hard work and a lot of sacrifice that may last an entire generation to realize.
And so now that you're here, you've had the opportunity to bring your family here and to to settle here in America. And now your children, obviously, are first-generation Americans, correct?
That's correct. So I'm a naturalized American, and my children were born here, all 4 of them.
So when you look at what's going on with the refugees from Syria and so forth in the headlines today, being forced out by ISIS, or the refugees from Latin American countries in Central America as well, what are your thoughts about those refugees trying to come to America, streaming out of those parts of the world?
Yeah, I think there are 2 things that come to mind. I think the first thing is that I realize that the refugee problem is one that has existed throughout humankind as long as there's political conflict, as long as there's turmoil. And the other thing I recognize is that it is a lot more complex now than it has ever been, not only in the size, but the challenge of what's involved. And so when we look at this big problem, it's a big political and legal nightmare, really. I want all Americans to know that, for the most part, at least half of the refugees are innocent children, and that while the political leaders have to deliberate and figure out what to do, I want every individual American to feel empowered, to be able to know that each individual action can help another real person.
Having said that,
just like they did with my family in 1979.
Dr. Vin Chung here on the line, who, by the way, graduated from Harvard Medical School after overcoming the language barriers, the poverty, and all the other challenges laid before you, and you were dropped here in Fort Smith, Arkansas, when your family came here. But, Doctor, wouldn't it be fair to say, though, that when you and your family came here to America, you were grateful to be here? The concern for many Americans, and I think it's a legitimate concern, is the root, the foundation of many of these folks in the Muslim religion, which still views America as the enemy, as the great Satan, and they would come here to do us harm, not to assimilate and become Americans as you and your family have, but to attack us and try to change what America is. Would that not be a legitimate concern?
Sure, it certainly is a legitimate concern, and I believe that the criteria for all people who seek to come to this country is that they must embrace our values of hard work, values of freedom, values of equality for men and women. And I think the challenge now is that we live in a much more complex world. For example, compared to 40 years ago, when we get on the plane, we now run a risk of having one violent individual wreaking havoc and just massive destruction. Right now, when we send our kids to school, there's also a risk from one violent individual. We'll go to the movie theater or attend a marathon, for example, in Boston. But I think that we need to look at that in context of the world that we're living in, and not to be paralyzed by fear, not to be paralyzed by reaching out and acting as Americans. And I think one of the fundamental values of Americans is that we always root for the underdog. And so it is a much more complex process now than before to root out, to figure out who are truly the people that we should accept and those that we shouldn't.
Dr. Vin Chung, one more question for you before we run out of time here. How important it is to you, you said you're a naturalized American citizen, that those that do come to this country follow the rules about coming here?
I think that it is extremely important, and even for Americans who are born here, I believe that everybody must always be deeply appreciative of the freedoms that we have in this country. And for me, going from a refugee to an American, I will forever be grateful, and I will always be a proud American.
I greatly appreciate that, and you know what? I salute you for the journey you made. And if you want to know more, read the book by Dr. Vin Chung, Where the Wind Leads, a refugee family's miraculous story of loss, rescue, and redemption. Doctor, thank you so much for your time, inspiring story, and a great conversation.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
It is Monday on the Steve Gruber Show. The hotline number, by the way, 888-900-9966, 888-900-9966. Dial it up with common sense, and we'll be here to field the call. We'll be right back.